I'd like to introduce the panel. The doctor is in, clinician-led innovation and investing in medtech. Our moderator here is Maggie Judge, Chief of Staff at Intercosmos. I had the pleasure of talking to Maggie some last night, and she's going to do a brilliant job here. A little bit about Maggie. She is a strategic and forward-thinking registered nurse within a wide range of key fields. Maggie's taken her experience in the nursing field to be a creative leader with a deep understanding of process, procedure, and a proven history of turning vision into reality. Maggie excels at strategy and implementation, project management, creating processes, analyzing and solving complex problems, as well as leading a team in a fast-paced, dynamic atmosphere. Maggie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited that I have a microphone. Those of you that know me know I do not need one, so thanks for the introduction. I would love to let the team explain their experience and what they bring, so I would love to just open the floor and we can start here and let you tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, I'm Dr. Qasim, but I'm a recovering nephrologist. I'm kind of in relapse right now. I'm going in between clinical and non-clinical. I'm working at UT Health San Antonio, and I'm doing some medical consulting as well. I'm with two LSI alums, actually, Aleo Medical, nephrology medical director, and Icona Health, which is a CKD education platform. I'm advisor to them, and that's who I am. Yeah, an investor as well too.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Monica Jain. I am a general and endocrine surgeon and the surgical innovation officer at Cedars-Sinai, just north of here, as well as a partner at Wavemaker 360 Health, which is an early stage digital health medical device fund. I do a lot of work also in human factors, understanding processes and usability, and have a background in engineering as well. So personally, I like to sit at the intersection of all of these areas.
Hi, I'm Rishad. I'm a family physician, founder of one failed startup, angel investor, and now I run HealthTech Investors, which is an angel syndicate of 500 physicians. We invest in early stage healthcare companies and have a focus on education.
I'm Matthew Savary. I manage the MedTech track of the UCLA Innovation Fund, a proof of concept fund at UCLA. By way of training, I was a general surgeon at Beth Israel in Boston before becoming the medical director for safety at Medtronic.
Ruben, Osnabrugge. I'm trained in cardiothoracic surgery in Erasmus MC in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. Work at EQT Life Sciences now, which is a leading European life sciences VC. We invest in medtech, drug development, but also in diagnostics and digital health. In between I spent 2 years at Philips. But very happy where I've landed now.
Wonderful. All right, let's get into it. So I would love to know, how do you think your clinical background and work done bedside gives you an edge over non-clinical entrepreneurs and investors?
I can go first. I think there is a balance between subject matter experts having biases, which can be harmful for de novo startups and startups that are very disruptive, and startups that are going to market within the 2 years. I think 2 years is the threshold of when we cannot predict the future beyond 2 years. So if you're going to market within 2 years, and if you are following a 510K pathway, then clinicians can add a lot of value, as usually your marker of success is, will physicians, clinicians use your products. But if you're doing something very disruptive that will not take to market in 15 years, then sometimes we can cause more harm than good, because we are stuck in our biases of, will I use this right now, not will the future 15-year me ahead me will use.
So I think that clinicians definitely add a lot of expertise. I think they really truly understand the market in which a device is going to land, and I completely agree with you that that is definitely a short term, but they understand the processes, the workflow, they understand what it would take to get someone to change their practice, and so I think that clinicians really help in that area and help in the implementation and adoption, which is especially where a lot of startups fail, is thinking about that aspect. So I think that clinicians are especially helpful in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. When do you think is a great time for a non-clinical based company to start onboarding a clinical based team?
I'll jump in here, and I'll just say immediately. So one of the hazards for believing that you've identified an opportunity for innovation in clinical medicine and in medtech is that there are a lot of stones in the stream that are not self-evident unless you've already operated in that space before. And so when you're trying to evaluate the value proposition of any kind of technical innovation, it's easy to bias towards the technical side of it rather than the clinical side of it. And so I know a lot of clinicians who are really interested in getting involved in this space, either from just one-off conversations to weekly conversations to monthly to quarterly. So it's not even particularly difficult to find somebody who'd be interested in having that kind of conversation with you, and validating that value proposition as early as possible is really important to me.
Yeah, so maybe something to add. A lot of our portfolio companies actually are part of a program like BioInnovate in Ireland, or BioDesign here in California. I think that also really goes into the unmet clinical need, and then think of solutions. So typically, so I haven't been in the program, but what I hear from the entrepreneurs that we invest in is that they identify unmet clinical needs, make a whole list of them, and then identify the ones that are most likely to make it in the end, considering all other factors. But it starts with the unmet clinical need.
Yeah. Oh, please go ahead.
I mean, even from a physician, like, it depends on, to me, I know you talked about the biases with, long-term projects or whatever, or long-term horizons, but even like, with physicians like myself that have been at it for like 10 years, we've seen it for a longer, so we can see how that product may fit in our clinical workflow, like she mentioned, but also what's the path to, revenue, right? I think so many people have a great product, a great idea, but there's no path to revenue, and who is going to be the payer for it? And so that's another thing I think a clinician can add. Is it the payer? Is it the insurance company? Is it the physician? Is it the patient? Who is going to actually pay for the product itself? So,
Before we move on, I just want to offer a counterpoint to Rishad's comment about the instinctive conservatism of some clinicians. I think that one of the benefits of having a clinician on your team who does have an innovative mindset is that it's easier for them to look at things from first principles, because they appreciate precisely what you're trying to get accomplished within a clinical setting outside of what they're already comfortable with providing. A very good example of that, I'm not going to call you out, I'm not going to point to you, but somebody in the room is one of our clinician innovators from UCLA, who's identified an opportunity for revolutionizing eye surgery. And if you had found one clinician who looked at it from a more parochial point of view, obviously that kind of person would say, we already do it this way, it's natural to stay in this way. This means, but if the clinician already understands the physiology of what they're trying to accomplish with their surgery or with that the procedure, it's easier to convince them of the value proposition of something that doesn't have an obviously self-evident business model immediately.
I agree with that statement. If you find an entrepreneurial DNA physician, a physician with a strong bias to action, then that is gold, and you should hang on to that. And I think what Matthew you're referring to is those particular physicians. I would say that is not the majority of physicians, but if you can identify those physicians, then they are invaluable because they can add the clinical ROI and also define your financial ROI. And to be somewhat blunt, a startup is product and sales, and I would say sales and product are both equally important.
So do you think investors are more willing to write a check for a company that has clinicians leading the helm or not?
As an investor myself, if you ask first-time founders what the most important thing is, they'll say product. If you ask second-time founders, they will say distribution. So if you're a clinician trying to raise, I want to see your commercialization plan. I want to see your distribution strategy, especially if you're a first-time founder, which I find a lot of clinicians are.
well, I mean, I just talked to a founder this morning, and he's here to raise some money as well. I'm not going to say who he was or what he wanted to do, but he was in the kidney care space, and he actually said he brought some physician on board just to say, as investors, just to say, because some VCs will be like, how come there's no nephrologist on your board or in your advisory, or how come they haven't invested, how come they haven't bought in? So I think just having that buy-in from physicians to legitimize what you're doing is kind of important too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from my standpoint as an investor, it's a hard no if there is no clinician expert in the space that you're working in that is on your team and more incorporated into your team, not necessarily full-time, but at least regular contact. There's a big difference in development when you have a clinician in that space actually working with you in the development and commercialization process rather than just having an advisory board and someone who you talk to every 6 months or something like that that just says, yeah, that sounds good, or no, that doesn't sound so great. And that development process and understanding how to develop in the right way, I think makes a huge difference. And so for me, it's always engage the experts early. I want to see a clinician on your team. And if you don't have that, then I personally, regardless of how awesome your technology is, think that you're going to hit that hurdle when it comes to the distribution, commercialization, adoption, and I'm not going to go for it.
Can I ask you a question regarding that? Like, do you think that clinician has to be in the specialty of what they're providing, or can it be kind of related, or?
Yeah, I think it depends on the product, right? Because there's some products that have many specialties that they could apply to. And so it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Now, if you're doing an education, like a company that is doing education in kidney care, I think I should see a nephrologist, a dialysis nurse, like some clinician in that space. If you're doing a product that is a surgical tool, it could be any type of surgeon. It doesn't have to be that first target market that you're going after, like cardiothoracic surgeons. It could be really any kind of surgeon, but just someone who has been in an operating room and has operated, right? So someone who has that experience, and I think that that makes a big difference.
No, I agree. What are some issues that you've seen in transferring from bedside to the entrepreneurial space? Excuse me. And how did you overcome those?
Go ahead, Ruben. I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I think to the entrepreneurial space, I think that there's actually more similarities to the step that I, for instance, did in between being in a big corporate. Because there you need to convince a lot of people. I haven't practiced in the US, but in the Netherlands, in hospital, especially in surgery, if you make a decision, things happen. I mean, in the middle of the night or during the day, it doesn't matter. Things happen quickly. In general, in business, you need to convince people. You need to get people on board. You need to manage your stakeholders. That's something that I really experienced when I was at Philips. Now, being closer to the entrepreneurs, I see that they make very well thought of decisions, but it happens quicker. So I think in some sense, clinicians, they are actually quite suited, most of them are quite suited to the entrepreneurial spirit, I would say, in general. Because you also have to figure things out on the go. How many, it's like see one, do one, teach one, right? So that's also a little bit in the entrepreneurial space, I would say. But I'm happy to hear your thoughts, yeah.
What I'd like to add to that is one of the, at least the way that I was trained in general surgery. One of the most important things that we were always held accountable for was being the expert on whatever was happening at any given time. And one of the things that I learned in moving to the commercial space is that it's kind of your responsibility to flip that and make sure that you absolutely should know your business and technology cold. It makes me feel very frustrated when I'm hearing from people who it feels like they read about it on the back of a magazine. But it's a good idea to have people who absolutely know more about you in whatever their functional domain is than at any given time, especially when you're running a company. So that's the big temperamental difference that I noticed between those two spaces.
The other thing I would say is, you know, as I've made this kind of halfway journey, like you have to get used to chaos and managing chaos. And so it's like, it's weird, especially a part of a startup. You know, you're like, what's my responsibility exactly? Who do I report to? All that kind of stuff kind of comes up as well too. And I think the other big thing is the opportunity cost of leaving medicine is what inhibits a lot of physicians from leaving it. It's hard to match that salary in other places, and it takes time. So I think that's one of the big things. So
That is a big one.
yeah.
I'll just add one thing. I think we are intuitive problem solvers and great at decision making. We know how to balance structure and intuition in decision making, and that is an invaluable thing to have in a startup journey.
Yeah, Monica?
I think that I completely agree with you. That's the number one thing for me is that doctors are, or clinicians in general, are problem solvers. We work under limited resources a lot of the time, especially now with our staffing constraints and things like that. We're always busy and kind of trying to figure out things on the fly. We're used to responding to codes, you know, all that sort of stuff that is the same in startups, just not patients, but you know, things related to your company, but where it's all the same skills. I think where we lack is that, especially as a surgeon, we're usually at the head and making all of the decisions, and as Matthew said, used to knowing everything about every piece of what we're working on and knowing exactly what's going on with anesthesia, with our instruments, with the patient, whatever it is. And it's difficult sometimes to make a transition into a field where you don't know what's next and you don't have control over every little piece. And so I think that's where there's a little bit of a struggle.
I think that's kind of what brought us all into entrepreneurship is the thrill seeking of the unknown. At least I love that part. But you know, coming back to what you said about managing chaos, I think one thing that's sort of an unseen task that we do is triaging. So when you walk into a room full of chaos, immediately our brain has 10 things to do and we know which order to do them. And most of the time, we're doing all of them at the exact same time. So that I see is something that we bring to the table. When you walk into a room, we can really help organize and bring things to life in a more streamlined fashion because when a patient's on the table and it's life or death, it's a pretty big moment. So I know we have a lot of clinicians in this space now, and you know they're the beginning of their journey. So, what is a piece of advice that you have for them that you wish you would have had at the beginning of your journey?
I can give advice that I actually did get, which
Even better.
This doesn't come naturally to clinicians, and has come more and more naturally to me over time. Is networking is so important, and it feels. At least for me, it felt, in the beginning, it felt smarmy and artificial and difficult, but the most up-to-date information about the most important things is inside people's heads. It doesn't exist in any database. It doesn't exist in any textbook. So if you want to understand the next step that you need to take for reimbursement, for regulatory, for taking your product to market, for your commercialization strategy, for your HR strategy, it's because you know somebody who knows somebody who knows something. So the advice that I got when I got started was to take 5 informational interviews, which felt very unnatural, and ask those for 5 people to talk to another set of coffees, and ask all of those to take me to another set of coffees. And one, it makes you feel, it kind of like destigmatizes like the networking atmosphere, because now that I do what I do, networking is just kind of like my job. And then 2 is it expands the opportunities that you're even aware of. So one of the shortcomings of the clinical path is that clinical medicine is a railroad track. So you get on, you do your residency, you do your fellowship, you do you get your first job, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the world of business is a jungle gym, and you don't know what's out there unless people can tell you where the other rungs are. So that's my bit of advice.
Yeah, what I can add to that is actually to find a great mentor, because like you need to have all those conversations, but also just to have 1 or maybe 2 people that you can really like long-term rely on and bounce off ideas with. I find it very helpful, especially when you go into a whole new world.
I'm sorry, I totally agree with that. Like that's one of the things I did when I started looking into medtech and stuff, is to talk to physicians that actually were in the space, because like if any of us talk to regular doctors that are just in the day-to-day, we sound crazy. And so you need that guidance that, hey, this is possible, this is what you have to do. And I think that's, kind of crucial, is to actually reach out to physicians that have already made it, that have been medical consulting or venture capital or whatever they've done, and see how they got there and see how you can do the same. So
I'll share advice I got and ignored, and I wish I didn't, which is when you're making your founding team, hire for commitment. Don't hire the rock star. Don't hire someone who looks really good on paper. Hire someone who believes in you, your mission, and who you get along with, who you've struggled with in the past and are still friends with them. And the second piece of advice I would give is when you are looking at what problem to solve, focus on the problem, not the solution. Once we start building things, we get distracted by how good or how flashy our things look on paper. But really stay focused on the solution or on the problem you're solving.
That's great advice.
I really want to double down on that actually, because a lot of times the biggest pain points in our lives as clinicians are not the biggest market or the biggest problem out there to solve that would make a good business. And so just because it's really awful for you doesn't mean that it's really awful in that same way for everyone else. And so a lot of times, especially for clinician-born companies, they're solving a big problem for themselves and then kind of get stuck in that process of expanding this to everybody else. And so really understanding the core of the problem, understanding a clinical need, understanding the market that's out there, which I think a lot of clinicians struggle with because, you know, every problem is a big problem and every problem affects our patients' lives in some way. And so, but understanding how to find the biggest problem that you can tackle and something that is also within your wheelhouse to tackle really makes a big difference. And so I think that clinical need portion is especially important. And also I will highly, highly second the networking aspect of this, because that networking portion makes such a big difference, because like as clinicians, we're often just like lone warriors out there. Like you're in clinic by yourself, you're in the OR, and you have a team, but really it's you're leading the team. And in this situation, it's very different. And you have to have all of those experts around you. And the only way you find those experts is by networking at events like this and meeting those people who are going to steer you in the right direction.
I think that's a beautiful point. You see really great products and companies get lost because they feel that because they don't have that entrepreneurial business background, that they bring on certain advisors and they start networking and everybody has an idea for your company and how they should push it and where they want it to go. So what's some advice for those companies where they feel like they're at that crossroads and then they have a lot of people coming at them, but they're not quite sure? How do you know what advice to listen to and where to go? And do you have some thoughts on that? Yeah, I know you do.
Well, it's actually very. So, how do you know who to listen to, who not, right? So, maybe as clinician, you have the benefit of listening well to patients. Maybe not so much as a CT surgeon, but in general, as a physician, you need to listen well, and that's a little bit your gut feeling, to be honest. Like which mentor would you trust? Which one would you go to? And try to pick someone who's actually completely out of your field. Like, I really want to have the most successful businessman who I thought initially was a little bit slick, but that person is actually really good. So I need to learn from him and or her. So yeah, that's yeah. I don't know. There's no formula, I would say.
Do you mind if I go here?
Get in there.
So I was lightly triggered by this one because we manage the startup portfolio of the university, and it makes me feel very frustrated when I encounter this problem. The issue is you have to have a point of view. And the point of view, you can hold on to it with your fingertips, hold on to it firmly, but you should be able to have it be pulled out, but you have to have a point of view. And having a point of view makes it easier for you to ask questions and ask directed questions. And those refine that point of view, but they don't inform it. It makes me feel frustrated when I am meeting with a team serially over time, and every time that I meet with them, they have an entirely new strategy, and I'm like, I know exactly who you just talked to 60 seconds ago. And that just makes me feel like you don't have a vision for your company, you don't have a vision for what this technology is supposed to be. So if you have a vision, if you have a point of view on what you're trying to accomplish, then getting that informed by multiple points of view just makes it better. But if you don't have a point of view in the first place, you just get buffeted around like a piece of litter in the wind. So I hope that didn't sound too negative.
That also doesn't mean that you only find the people who agree with you, right? Like, I think that the point is very valid, but you also have to find the people who contradict you. And then instead of like just blindly accepting whoever comes at you, I think you have to kind of then go and explore that a little bit more. So it's a difficult position to be in, especially if you don't have the expertise in those areas. And so getting as many points as perspectives as possible is what I think helps, because if multiple people are telling you the same thing, then that's probably what is true, rather than this lone person here and this lone person here. And then again, it comes down to networking and talking to a ton of different people and getting perspectives.
So I want to double down on that because or explore that a little bit more, because I think that what you pointed out is that the object here is not just having a point of view, it's having a hypothesis and then going out there and testing that hypothesis or validating that hypothesis. So the objective isn't necessarily to confirm it, even though if you did confirm it, that would be great. You have more information now. But to walk out there with a hypothesis about what the value proposition is, what the path to market is, what the regulatory strategy is, and then having that validated is great.
Yeah, it's really interesting with pivoting and having people who can poke holes and finding that balance. I know we have lots of people attending, and I just wanted to take a second to see if there's anybody in the audience who might have a question for anyone on our panel, any advice you'd like to seek real quick before we move forward? No? Can't see you? No? Okay. You're quiet out there. All right. See, we did such a great job of answering all of their questions. I think it's fantastic, you know, when you watch, especially like on the nursing side in sales. And this has been a really big topic and something that I really love to talk about because, you know, it's really hard to navigate the hospital system. I mean, even as somebody who works in the hospital system, it's changing every hour. And so how do you feel clinicians transfer over into a sales team? Not even as an entrepreneur or an investor, but building your sales team of clinicians who truly know that space.
Well, I think clinician KOLs are the ultimate when it comes to selling into health systems. And so having that KOL makes a big difference. And if it's the founder who is the KOL, I think that helps a lot because you truly understand your value proposition. You understand what your business direction is. Like you have that understanding as a clinician founder and then going out to sell. However, the part that I will bring, the other side of that is that they have a lot of bias and thinking, obviously, like their solution is the best. And so then sometimes that can be off-putting to having someone else out there. And so I think you have to kind of have a team of KOLs that's developed in that way, and a clinician founder is the best person to understand who can build out that team so that you really have the balance of people who believe in what you're doing, but then also aren't as biased as that clinician founder is.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Clinicians have a bias towards if it adds clinical value, it will sell. But there's a lot of tension between what health systems want, what insurance wants, and what clinicians want, and sometimes what patients want. To understand all those four players is important, and to understand who is driving and generating your revenue is very important, and focus on that. Sales is about listening and solving problems, and I think most clinicians that I come across, and I'm generalizing here, would benefit from even an hour of sales training. So I think that's something that we should, as investors, maybe we should take that on and do that for our clinician founders.
Yeah, maybe just to add something from an investor perspective, we do see, of course, in certain areas, we see specific KOLs being tied to all of the different companies. So it doesn't mean that when you're really trying to find out if that company, that technology is going to work, you don't need to necessarily rely on these top KOLs because they will be involved in any of them and they want the field to be developed. So there's just a little bit of nuance there from my perspective.
But I think this also then comes back to my earlier point about understanding the processes in the hospital and having someone from the beginning understanding how to develop the product in a way that allows it to be implemented. So yes, there is a natural transition in that way, and then having that perspective from early on in the development process then makes your sales cycle that much easier, because you say that we developed this in a way where we understand all the workflows, and this is the way that it's going to go in. We're going to make it super easy for you, and I think that that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. So how do you see, thinking of hospital processes and how hospital systems and insurance companies are now leaning more towards just focusing on cost savings, and how that's affect not only products that ideas that are coming up now, but products that have been working so diligently for the past 10 years to bring something to market, and now it's quickly changing, and how they can use their product to show the cost savings in the end to help make their product stand out above the others.
I think it's a very tough market for founders, as increasing revenue is really at the forefront, and even reducing expenditure is not looked at as favorably anymore. 10 years ago, medtech devices and companies could have a proof of concept and exit, but now they can't anymore. They need a commercialization strategy. And from what I'm seeing, and I'm fairly new in this field, a lot of the buyers and acquirers, they want products in the market before they will offer.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the field, I would say, as well. Structural heart is notorious for early exits, but in general, yeah, totally. And maybe one thing to add on the reimbursement health economic aspects, I think a lot of funds really double down on that, because we all know there's two big problems in healthcare. It's a shortage of staff, actually the most important one, I would say, but then also the cost in healthcare. And so you cannot come with an innovation that just increases the cost. So yeah, in our fund, it's called the Health Economic Fund. And every investment we make, we do a whole analysis on the impact on the health economic scenario. So from the hospital, from the society, for the individual clinician, I think it's essential.
So I just want to ask the panel about this, and possibly the rest of the room. Because I've heard this pretty consistent story about the narrowing margins within healthcare and the need to make a better health economics story, but at the same time, when we've had conversations about the adoption of surgical robots, I get a lot of hand waving. It's just $2 million a year. That's less than a surgeon's salary, so I don't even worry about it. And that's from like the CFOs or like a value analysis committee leaders that I've spoken with. So how do we reconcile those two things? Because those are two completely different stories.
Well, so I think that depends on who you talk to, right? So surgery in general drives revenue in a hospital. Sure. It's not the ICU, it's not the medical patients on medical floors where they're being treated for pneumonia in-house or something like that. It's surgery. So when surgery drives revenue, anything that you can do to increase your surgical volumes and be attractive to a patient who will then come to your hospital for surgery is where you will invest. And so that is all about driving revenue for the hospital, which is what you need. The other benefit is, talking specifically about robots, comes down to the decreased staffing needs with a robot. Like, you don't have to staff residents with someone who's on the robot or an assistant or something like that. And I've heard some great arguments for value add for surgeons, especially in community and rural areas where they're able to operate with a robot without needing an additional assistant at the bedside that the hospital then has to supply and things like that. And so I do think that, it's still within the same realm of hospitals are trying to drive revenue, and then, eventually will be decreasing costs, but this is how they see that as an investment. Going back to your question, I think that from the clinical perspective, it depends on what type of clinician you are. So if you are employed by a health system and you are like seeing patients, like say you're a hospitalist in a health system, probably you don't interact very much with billing. All of your stuff goes, all of whatever you do goes to the billing department in that health system, and the billing department kind of takes care of everything. Whereas if you are a private practice physician, you have a full understanding of what billing means, and understand what reimburses better and how to up bill for whatever you're doing. And so I think that there is a different understanding amongst different clinicians as to what gets reimbursed, what doesn't, how to bill properly, and then kind of understanding that aspect of the business. And so I actually do think that there are a lot of clinician founders who don't understand that reimbursement strategy, even though they're in the medical world, like they just don't get it. And so that's, again, another area where engaging experts really helps, but there's a wide range of expertise when it comes to clinicians and understanding billing and reimbursement and value and all of those aspects of care.
I'm not even sure if hospitals and insurance company billers understand how the reimbursement and everything works. So to understand it from that perspective, especially when you're a physician and you have a billing team that does it, you don't see it, but it really is such a driver. And to kind of jump back, because the previous company I was with, we were in the robotic space, and so I think a lot of times they can say we can spend $2 million on this robotic piece here because you're helping retain surgeons because they do bring revenue, and instead of them leaving and going to an ASC because they don't want to have to deal with all of the rules that the hospital system is putting on them, they can make more revenue, open their ASC through a hospital system. But now they have to incur the cost of buying a Da Vinci for millions of dollars. So hospitals are kind of moving that way, and it's also marketing. So I'm in Houston, where I believe we have more hospitals per capita than any other city in the country. And so there's billboards everywhere. You're continuously competing. If my insurance can use at any hospital, why are you going to choose me? It's because of that surgeon. And I have a friend who had that surgery, and she recommended this surgeon, so it's not necessarily the hospital, but you're like, I saw that fancy billboard with that fancy machine that I don't know anything about. So they kind of help with those costs that way. So it's more than just the cost. It's what does it bring, too, which is exciting. I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you see that within companies and how that goes into their go-to-market strategy.
I'll just say something about marketing in general, and I think really pulling on the scarcity, the principles of marketing, scarcity, urgency, reciprocity, is a really strong force. And if you can say we are the only hospital in this region with this device, that really pulls on that scarcity mindset.
Yeah, well, I think the robotics topic is very interesting. We can discuss it a lot. But if I may, I just have a question. I'm being the only European here on the panel. What I always admire in the US, that there are indeed a lot of clinicians who go the entrepreneurial route. So what is the reason that there's more spark there to do it? I really see it. In the Netherlands, there's only a few clinicians who want to take that risk and want to do it. Are you incentivized to do it? Are your mentors doing it? Or yeah.
Our system is really broken.
Like that's a whole other panel or two.
Yeah, that's what I would say is our system is very broken. There are a lot of problems, and there are a lot of problems that we think that we can solve better than what's happening right now. So I think that that's where a lot of that entrepreneurial drive comes from.
And I think we have, I was going to say in the U.S., like, there's different entry points to attack problems, too. We have different states, Medicaid, Medicare, different Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicare Advantage plans. So your entry point is not one giant bureaucracy of a country. It's various, you could have various entry points to get into. I think that actually causes maybe more innovation or creativity in that respect. Do you see what I'm saying?
To add to Monica's point, most of us are running away from clinical medicine, not running towards entrepreneurship. Yeah. But over time, it does change to an extent, and I think it's important to lean into your strengths.
Well, and now we have these MCOs and ACOs that they're basically like the mob. The insurance companies pay them to make sure that we do everything that they want us to do. So they kind of take away our autonomy and our thinking to where now, instead of treating a patient, we just have a checklist. And we have to go through and ask all these questions, and we're checking that off. And that's not why we got into medicine. We got here because we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to help people, and when you just become, you just feel like another person. You're not special. They give you the stale pizza from the kitchen to say thank you, Nurses Week. You know, you don't feel important. And when you watch patients suffer day after day because of the inadequacies of the system, you get inspired to say, you know what, I can't take anymore, and I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to die trying. That's my.
To flip it onto a positive note,
I thought that was positive.
a good fraction of the impetus is that it's just rad. I have a really awesome job, and I don't think that there's as much exposure to that in Europe because we have a more dynamic startup ecosystem out here, and so you can see people who are getting out there and getting to do these different kinds of things, getting to see new technology, new procedures, and stuff like that. So if you have a motor in your chest and you live inside the United States, then you look out there and you're like, a new life is possible.
The final frontier. We are in our last minute. Is there any other questions anyone has, or a little piece of advice you would like to bestow on our audience or each other?
Wow.
That's a
Thank you,
loaded
Jawad.
question. So I think it comes back to our discussion about the value add. So on one hand, demonstrating how big the problem is and how much it affects the system, either through money, which is the easy way, but also with time, with the number of resources that are being used or things along those lines. And so it's really understanding the value that's associated, or the value loss that's associated with the problem, and the value add with your solution, and like kind of bringing those two together. And so I don't think that there are any hard metrics in that way, but as a clinician who kind of looks at these types of problems and understanding like what is a meaningful change, like having to have one less nurse on a ward actually makes a big difference, for example. And so I think that it all depends, like it's obviously highly variable because it depends on your solution, but that's what I would say is like demonstrating the value. Yeah, there's a lot of data now out there about the expenses that are associated with loss of a clinician and the expense that's required in training a new clinician, and also understanding the differences between an expert team and a non-expert team when it comes to taking care of patients. And there's actually a lot of data out there about that now. So I agree with you that retention is as important as reducing the amount of staff that's necessary.
Absolutely, and I don't mean to cut you off. We need another panel after this, but they're going to start playing the Oscar music, and it's time to end. But I do say I love that question, and I've always said the most important person in a hospital is the housekeeper, because they control the flow of the entire hospital. So when you're sitting in the emergency room and you get a bed quickly, thank the housekeeper for cleaning that bed in ICU or med-surg to get you there. So thank you everybody so much for your time, and thank you everybody. We hope this was informative for you and you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thanks.